I looked for you. After you transferred, I went to your old house. You were just gone.
Don't do this here. Not on the street.
Zarya.
Ji-hoon.
Mom, who is this?
An old friend.
From high school. 10 years. I looked for you. After you transferred, I went to your old house. You were just gone.
Don't do this here. Not on the street. The money you gave me, it cost me more than you know.
What do you mean?
10 years ago, a desperate deal between two teenagers was never supposed to leave a mark. It did, and on an ordinary afternoon, that debt finally found them both. Enjoy the story.
The midday sun beat down on the concrete pavement. His oversized t-shirt was stained with dirt.
His name was Micah. His oversized t-shirt was stained with dirt, and his bare feet were tucked underneath his small body to keep them away from the heavy boots of busy pedestrians. The aroma of warm yeast, melted butter, and sugar drifted from the bakery doors every time a customer walked out, making Micah's stomach growl so loudly that the woman standing nearest to him gave a sharp tut and moved away. Across the street, standing next to a sleek black vehicle, was Ji-hoon. He was a billionaire, a man whose name was whispered in boardroom meetings with absolute reverence. He had long black hair that fell softly around his jawline, a sharp contrast to the rigid tailored suits he usually wore. Today he wore a pair of designer glasses resting on the bridge of his nose, giving him an air of detached intelligence. He wasn't moving. He was simply watching the boy. Ji-hoon had lived a life where money solved every problem, yet it had also taught him that human nature was inherently selfish. He wanted to see how long it would take for anyone, to notice the dying light in that boy's eyes. Minutes ticked by. A businessman stepped right over Micah's outstretched hand. A mother pulled her young daughter away, whispering something about staying away from people like that. Ji-hoon sighed mentally, his cynical view of the world confirming itself once again. People only cared about themselves. Then the heavy glass doors of the high-end restaurant next to the bakery swung open. A teenage black girl walked out carrying a large brown paper bag that radiated heat and the rich aroma of slow-cooked beef and fresh herbs. Her name was Journey. She was 15, with bright, observant eyes and an energy that seemed to push against the cold indifference of the city. She didn't look at her phone. She looked straight ahead, and within 3 seconds her eyes locked onto Micah. Without a moment of hesitation, Journey changed her direction. She walked past the wealthy shoppers and knelt right in front of the boy, ignoring the dust that rubbed off on her sneakers. She opened the brown bag and pulled out a large steaming container of food and a soft piece of artisan bread. "Hey there," Journey said, her voice soft but clear enough to drift across the sidewalk. "I accidentally ordered way too much lunch. My mom is going to kill me if I bring this back. Do you think you could help me out and eat it?" Micah looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at the bread, then at Journey, his lips trembling. "Is it really for me?" "Every single bite." Journey smiled, handing him a plastic fork. "Eat up. It's really good. I promise. My mom made it." From across the street, Ji-hoon adjusted his glasses. His heart, which had felt like a block of ice for years, gave a sudden violent thud. He wasn't looking at the girl anymore. His gaze had shifted to the woman who had just stepped out of the restaurant behind the teenager. It was Zarya. She was 26 now, but the moment Ji-hoon saw her, he was instantly thrown back to the hallways of their high school 10 years ago. She had changed her hair. It was now tinted a warm, rich brown that caught the sunlight beautifully. She wore a pair of stylish designer glasses pushed up on top of her head, holding back her hair. Zarya was a renowned chef now, a woman who had built her own culinary empire through sheer willpower and long, grueling hours in the kitchen. But to Ji-hoon, she was still the girl who had changed his life. 10 years ago, Ji-hoon had been a lonely teenager, burdened by the immense wealth and expectations of his family. He had been a target for everyone who wanted a piece of his fortune. Zarya, who had desperately needed money to help her family at the time, had agreed to a bizarre arrangement. He paid her to pretend to be his girlfriend to keep the opportunistic socialites away from him. But during those months of fake dates and shared secrets, Ji-hoon had fallen deeply in love with her. And then, without warning, she had transferred schools, disappeared from his life, and left him with nothing but a broken heart and a pile of unanswered questions. Now she was standing just 20 feet away from him, watching Journey with a look of pure maternal pride. Zarya walked over to Journey and Micah, her movements graceful but grounded. She didn't wear fancy dresses or high heels. She looked like a woman who knew the value of hard work. "Did you give him the whole loaf, Rose?" Zarya asked, a gentle tease in her voice as she rubbed her daughter's shoulder. She called her Rose since Journey was a toddler, short for the girl's middle name, and it had stuck. "He was hungry, Mom," Journey said, looking up with a pout. "You always say food is meant to be shared." Zarya smiled, a soft, genuine expression that reached her eyes. "You're right. I did say that. Eat it good, sweetie." Ji-hoon couldn't take it anymore. The questions that had haunted him for a decade burned in his chest. He closed the distance between them, his leather shoes clicking against the pavement. As he approached, the subtle scent of Zarya's familiar perfume mixed with the street air, making his hands shake slightly. "Zarya," he said, his voice cracking just a little, breaking through his usual stoic demeanor. Zarya froze. She knew that voice. She turned around slowly, her brown hair catching the light. When her eyes met his behind his glasses, her breath hitched. Her hand instinctively went to her chest, fingers curling into the fabric of her dark top. "Ji-hoon," she whispered. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The bustling city seemed to fade into a dull hum. Journey looked up from Micah, her sharp eyes darting between her mother and the wealthy-looking man with the long hair. "You haven't changed much," Ji-hoon said, trying to regain his composure, though his eyes gave away the sheer panic and longing he felt. "Except for the hair. It suits you." Zarya swallowed hard, her emotions warring behind her eyes. She felt a sudden rush of defensiveness, a protective wall slamming up. She had been through so much since they last spoke. After Ji-hoon, she had tried to find love, but a string of painful heartbreaks had left her exhausted and cynical about romance. She had realized she didn't need a man to complete her life. What she wanted was a family, someone to love unconditionally. That was why, at 25, she had made the choice to adopt Journey, a girl who needed a home just as much as Zarya needed a purpose. "Thank you," Zarya said, her tone polite but guarded. "What are you doing here, Ji-hoon? I thought you only frequented the financial districts." "I was just observing," he said, gesturing vaguely toward Micah, who was now happily eating the bread. "Your daughter has a kind heart. She gets that from you." Zarya let out a soft, dry laugh, looking away for a second. "No, Ji-hoon. She has her own heart. I just try not to ruin it." Journey stood up, dusting off her hands, her protective instincts kicking in as she noticed the tension in her mother's posture.
Who is this?
"Mom, who is this?"
An old friend.
Zarya looked at her daughter,
From high
her
school.
expression softening
years.
instantly. "Rose, this is an old friend from high school." "Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon, this is my daughter, Journey." Ji-hoon looked at the teenage girl, a sudden realization hitting him. He looked at Zarya, his chest tightening. "You're a mother. I didn't know you got married." "I didn't," Zarya said directly, her voice firm. "I adopted Journey last year. It's just the two of us, and we like it that way." There was a heavy silence. Ji-hoon could feel the distance between them, a vast canyon created by 10 years of silence and missed opportunities. He wanted to reach out, to ask her why she had left him without saying goodbye, why she had vanished the moment their fake relationship ended. But looking at her now, seeing the independent, fierce woman she had become, he felt a profound sense of regret. He had been a coward back then, hiding behind his money. "I'll look for you," Ji-hoon said quietly, ignoring the fact that his driver was watching him from the car with a confused expression. "After you transferred, I went to your old house. You were just gone." Zarya's eyes flickered with a brief flash of old pain. "The money you gave me for playing the part of your girlfriend, it helped pay for my grandmother's medical bills, Ji-hoon. But my family had to move closer to the hospital. Everything happened so fast. And honestly, I didn't think you'd care. It was a business deal for you. Remember, you needed a shield, and I needed cash. It was never just a business deal for me, Zarya, Ji-hoon said, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. Zarya bit her lower lip, her emotions threatening to spill over. She shook her head, pushing her designer glasses further back into her brown hair. Don't do this here, Ji-hoon. Not on the street. Not after 10 years. I have a restaurant to run and a daughter to take care of. Mom, Journey said softly, touching Zarya's arm. Micah finished his food. Can we buy him some water from the cart over there? Yes, sweetie. Go ahead. Here's some cash, Zarya said, handing her daughter a few bills without taking her eyes off Ji-hoon. As Journey walked away to help the little boy, Zarya stepped closer to Ji-hoon. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady. You built your empire, Ji-hoon. I see your face on the news all the time. You got exactly what your family wanted for you. Why do you look so unhappy? Ji-hoon let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for a decade. Because the view from the top is incredibly cold when you're standing there alone. Zarya looked at him, her heart aching in a way she hadn't felt in years. She had spent a long time convincing herself that she was done with men, that her heart was closed off for good. But seeing him now, with his long hair slightly messy from the city wind, looking at her with the same vulnerability he had shown her when they were teenagers, cracked something deep inside her defense mechanisms. I have to go, Zarya said, her voice trembling slightly. The lunch rush is starting soon. Zarya, wait, Ji-hoon said, stepping forward. Please don't disappear on me a second time. Let me come to the restaurant. Let me just talk to you. Not as a billionaire and not as a client. Just as the boy who used to sit next to you in the library. Zarya looked back at Journey, who was currently talking to the water vendor, making sure Micah got a large bottle of water. Then she looked back at Ji-hoon. She saw his flaws, his stubborn pride, his tendency to isolate himself from the world, the way he analyzed everything through a lens of suspicion. But she also saw the lonely boy who had once shared his lunch with her when he thought no one was looking. The restaurant is called the Copper Spoon, Zarya said softly, a tiny, tentative smile appearing on her face. We close at 8. Don't wear a suit. It makes the staff nervous. Ji-hoon's face cracked into a genuine, brilliant smile, his eyes crinkling behind his glasses. I won't. I promise. Zarya turned and called out to her daughter. Come on, Rose. We need to get back before the pastry chef burns the tarts again. Journey waved goodbye to Micah, who was now smiling, his small stomach full for the first time in days. The teenager jogged back to her mother, giving Ji-hoon a long, calculating look before falling in a step beside Zarya. As they walked away, Ji-hoon stood on the sidewalk, watching them disappear into the crowd. For the first time in 10 years, the city didn't feel so cold. He looked over at Micah, who was looking back at him. Ji-hoon walked over to the water vendor, pulled out his wallet, and handed the man a thick stack of bills. Give that boy whatever he wants, every day for the next year, Ji-hoon said. I'll be checking. The vendor nodded rapidly, his eyes wide. Ji-hoon walked back to his car, his mind racing. He had a second chance. He wasn't going to waste it. He knew Zarya had been hurt before. He could see the caution in the way she carried herself. He knew earning her trust wouldn't be easy, especially with a protective teenage daughter watching his every move. But for the first time in his life, Ji-hoon felt like he had something worth fighting for. The afternoon sun began its slow descent, casting long amber shadows across the bustling kitchen of the Copper Spoon. The clatter of pots, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables, and the occasional shout of an order being called out filled the space with a frantic kind of energy. Zarya stood at the center island, her brown hair tied back securely, though a few stray strands framed her face. She was meticulously plating a dish, her fingers steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, bringing in the muted chatter of the dining room, her heart did a nervous little dance. Journey sat on a stool in the corner, a textbook open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Instead, her eyes were fixed on her mother. You've wiped that counter 3 times already, Mom, Journey observed, tapping her pen against the wood. If you scrub it any harder, you're going to take the finish right off. Zarya stopped, the kitchen towel gripped tightly in her hand. She exhaled slowly, looking at her daughter. I'm just making sure everything is clean, Rose. A clean kitchen is a successful kitchen, right? And it has absolutely nothing to do with the guy with the long hair and the expensive glasses, Journey said, a knowing smirk playing on her lips. Zarya sighed, tossing the towel onto the island. Is it that obvious? Mom, you've been jumping every time a timer goes off. You're never like this. Journey leaned forward, her expression shifting from teasing to genuinely curious. So, are you going to tell me the real story? You said he was an old friend, but the way you two were looking at each other looked like a scene out of a drama. It's complicated, Zarya said, walking over to the stool and resting her hands on Journey's shoulders. We knew each other at a time when my life was very different. I was stressed, worried about money, trying to figure out how to take care of my family. He was a distraction, a complicated one. Did he hurt you? Journey asked bluntly. Zarya shook her head quickly. No, not intentionally. We just lived in two different worlds, Rose. His family had expectations, and I had realities. When the time came for me to leave, it just made sense to cut ties cleanly. I didn't think I'd ever see him again, let alone stand on a street corner talking to him. Well, he looked like he wanted to buy the bakery just because you stood near it, Journey muttered, turning back to her textbook. I'm just saying, keep your guard up. Men have a track record around here, and I like our life exactly how it is. Zarya smiled softly, pressing a kiss to the top of Journey's head. I love our life too, sweetie. Nothing is going to change that. I promise. By the time the clock struck 8, the last of the dinner guests had filtered out, leaving the dining room bathed in a soft, dim light. The kitchen staff had finished their cleanup and said their goodbyes, leaving only Zarya and Journey behind. Zarya had changed out of her chef's coat into a simple charcoal sweater, her designer glasses resting on her head again. She was checking the locks on the back door when the front bell chimed. A sudden wave of nervousness washed over her. She took a deep breath, smoothed down her sweater, and walked out into the dining room. Standing by the entrance was Ji-hoon. True to his word, he wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a simple black crewneck sweater and dark trousers, though the fabric was clearly high quality. His long hair was pushed back behind his ears, and his glasses sat squarely on his nose. Without the rigid framework of his business attire, he looked younger, more approachable, and incredibly vulnerable. You didn't wear a suit, Zarya said, her voice cutting through the quiet room. Ji-hoon looked up, his face instantly softening when he saw her. I keep my promises, Zarya. Even if it means my security team thinks I've lost my mind for walking around without a jacket. Zarya gestured toward a table near the window, away from the streetlights. Sit down. Can I get you anything? I have some chamomile tea, or some leftover peach cobbler if you're hungry. Tea sounds perfect. Thank you, he said, pulling out a chair and sitting down, his eyes following her every movement. Zarya went into the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly as she poured hot water into a ceramic teapot. Journey looked up from the counter, giving her mother a supportive nod. Go on, Mom. I'll stay back here and do my homework. If he acts weird, I have a rolling pin. Zarya couldn't help but laugh, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Thanks, Rose. Carrying the tray out, Zarya sat down across from Ji-hoon. She poured him a cup, the steam rising between them, creating a warm barrier against the outside world. For a few moments, neither of them spoke, the silence heavy with the weight of 10 years. Your restaurant is beautiful, Ji-hoon said, breaking the silence. It feels warm. Like you. It took a lot of sleepless nights to get it here, Zarya said, taking a sip of her own tea. But it's mine. Every brick, every menu item. I wanted to build something that belonged completely to me. I'm glad you did, he said softly. When you vanished from the school roster, I went to the principal's office. I demanded to know where you went. They wouldn't tell me anything because of student privacy laws. I even hired an investigator, but your family had used a relocation service that kept things incredibly quiet. I felt like I had imagined the whole thing. The dates, the talks in the library, The way you used to laugh when I tried to explain corporate finance to you. Zarya looked down at her cup, her fingers tracing the rim. It wasn't imagined, Ji-hoon. It was very real. But you have to understand, I was terrified. The deal we made, it was supposed to be simple. I pretend to be your girlfriend, so your family stops arranging dates for you. You pay me enough to cover my grandmother's treatment, and we go our separate ways. But then you started looking at me differently. You started saying things that didn't sound like a script. Because it stopped being a script, Ji-hoon said, leaning forward, his eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. The moment you argued with the waiter because he brought me the wrong order, or the time you fell asleep on my shoulder while we were supposed to be studying, I wasn't acting anymore. I was terrified too. I had never cared about anyone like that before. Zarya looked up, her eyes bright. I knew you were catching feelings, Ji-hoon, and that's exactly why I had to leave. My grandmother passed away right after we moved. The money you gave me allowed her to spend her final days in comfort, and I will always be grateful for that. But after she died, my mother and I had nothing left in that city. And I knew your family would never accept me. A girl from a working-class background who took money to play a part. They would have ruined me, and they would have turned you against me. I would never have let them do that, he countered, his voice rising slightly before he checked himself, conscious of the quiet room. You were 16, Ji-hoon, Zarya said gently, her tone filled with a sad wisdom. You didn't have the power to stop them back then. You think you did, but you didn't. I saved both of us a lot of misery by leaving when I did. Ji-hoon leaned back in his chair, a look of profound regret settling over his features. Maybe you're right, but it didn't stop the ache. I spent years trying to fill that void with work. I took over the company. I expanded the international sectors. I made more money than my grandfather ever dreamed of. And yet, every time I achieved something, I'd look around and realize the one person I wanted to tell wasn't there. Zarya's heart swelled, a mixture of pain and affection swirling inside her. She reached out, her hand stopping just short of touching his on the table. She pulled it back, resting in her lap. You're a good man, Ji-hoon. A bit stubborn and clearly too cynical for your own good, but good. Seeing you watch that little boy today, I knew the boy I liked in high school was still in there somewhere. Journey came out from the kitchen then, holding a stack of plates. She walked over with a deliberate slowness, setting the plates down on a nearby side table before turning her gaze to Ji-hoon. So, Mr. Billionaire, Journey said, crossing her arms. Are you just here to talk about the past? Or do you actually have a purpose? Because my mom usually goes to bed by 9:30, and she has to be back here at 5 in the morning to receive the fish delivery. Journey, Zarya said warningly, though there was no real heat in her voice. Ji-hoon looked at the teenager, not offended in the least. In fact, a faint smile appeared on his face. He appreciated her protectiveness. I don't want to keep your mother up, Journey. I just wanted to make sure she didn't disappear again. And I wanted to ask if I could come back. Not during closing hours. Maybe for lunch. Journey looked at Zarya, then back at Ji-hoon. The food isn't cheap, even for a billionaire. I think I can manage the bill, Ji-hoon replied, his eyes crinkling behind his glasses. Fine, Journey said, turning on her heel. But don't sit at the corner table. The draft is bad over there, and it makes people grumpy. As Journey walked back into the kitchen, Zarya let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. She's 15 going on 40. She's had to grow up fast, but she's the best thing that ever happened to me. How did you decide to adopt? Ji-hoon asked, his curiosity genuine. Zarya's expression turned thoughtful, her gaze drifting toward the kitchen doors. After I established the restaurant, I tried dating a few times, but every relationship felt like a transaction. Men wanted a chef who could cook for their friends, or a businesswoman they could show off. No one actually wanted me. After the last breakup, which left me pretty broken, I realized I was looking for the wrong kind of love. I didn't need a partner to make me feel whole. I had so much love to give, and there were so many kids who needed a safe place. I met Rose at a community youth center where I volunteered. She was sharp, defensive, and completely closed off. We just clicked. It took a year of paperwork, but she's my daughter now. You're incredible, Zarya, Ji-hoon said quietly. You build a life out of nothing but your own strength. It wasn't nothing, she said, looking right into his eyes. I had memories. Even the hard ones helped me grow. Ji-hoon stood up slowly, realizing the time was slipping away. He didn't want to overstay his welcome, especially with Journey's strict schedule looming. Thank you for the tea, Zarya, and for not throwing me out the moment I walked in. Zarya stood up too, walking him toward the front door. I'm not that mean, Ji-hoon. Besides, you promised to pay for lunch sometime. I intend to hold you to that. I'll be here tomorrow, he said, his hand resting on the brass door handle. At noon. Don't bring the fancy car, Zarya teased softly. It ruins the neighborhood aesthetic. I'll take a taxi. He smiled. Good night, Zarya. Good night, Ji-hoon. Zarya watched through the glass as he walked down the street, his long hair blowing slightly in the evening breeze. He didn't look like the imposing figure from the financial magazines anymore. He looked like someone who had just found a missing piece of himself. She locked the door, turning around to find Journey leaning against the doorframe of the kitchen, her arms crossed. So, Journey asked. So, Zarya said, walking over and wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders as they headed back to finish up. He's coming for lunch tomorrow, and you're going to be on your best behavior. I'm always on my best behavior. Journey grinned. But if he doesn't tip well, I'm putting extra salt in his soup. The lunch rush at the Copper Spoon was a symphony of organized chaos. The clinking of silverware, the low hum of conversations, and the sharp hiss of garlic hitting hot oil created a rhythm that Zarya usually found comforting. Today, however, her stomach tied itself into nervous knots with every chime of the front door. She stood at the expediting station, inspecting a plate of seared trout, but her eyes kept darting toward the street window. She wore a simple charcoal apron over a black short-sleeve blouse, her designer glasses pushed up onto her brown hair. She wiped her hands on a towel, taking a slow breath. She was a professional. She had cooked for food critics and city council members. She could handle a lunch date with an old high school flame. Journey bumped her hip gently as she walked by with a tray of empty water glasses. He's 5 minutes late, Mom, the teenager pointed out, a teasing glint in her eyes. I told you rich guys run on their own clocks. Zarya took the tray from her daughter and slid it onto the dishwashing counter. He took a taxi, Rose. Traffic is unpredictable. And honestly, I'm completely fine if he takes his time. It gives me a minute to stop feeling like I'm 16 again. Right on cue, a standard yellow taxi pulled up to the curb outside. The back door opened and Ji-hoon stepped out. True to his promise, he wore no suit, a dark gray sweater and dark trousers, his long hair neatly brushed back, his glasses catching the midday sun. He paid the driver, adding a tip that made the man grin widely, then turned toward the glass doors. Journey crossed her arms, standing next to her mother. Okay, I will admit he actually took a cab. That is 1 point for Mr. Billionaire. Go back to your station, Zarya scolded lightly, though a smile betrayed her. And please be polite. The bell above the door chimed, and Ji-hoon stepped inside. The dining room was packed, but his eyes immediately found Zarya at the back. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade as they looked at each other. He looked incredibly out of place among the casual business crowd, carrying an air of quiet authority. And yet he stood with a hesitant posture, as if waiting for permission to enter her world. Zarya walked around the counter, wiping her hands one last time, and met him halfway across the floor. You made it, she said, her voice soft but steady. I said I would be here at noon, he replied, looking down at her with a gentle expression. I'm 5 minutes late. I apologize. The driver had an interesting story about his daughter going to college, and I didn't want to interrupt him. Zarya felt a flutter in her chest. The old Ji-hoon would have complained about the inefficiency of public transport. This man had sat and listened to a stranger. It's perfectly fine, she said. Come on. I saved you a table near the back, away from the draft, just like Rose instructed. He followed her to a small, intimate table tucked away from the main walkway. As he sat down, Journey appeared instantly, placing a glass of ice water in front of him with a soft thud. Welcome back, she said, her tone perfectly polite, but carrying a subtle edge of teenage scrutiny. Have you decided what you want? Or do you need me to explain the menu? Ji-hoon looked at the girl, clearly amused. I think I'll trust the chef. Whatever your mother recommends, I'll have. Journey narrowed her eyes slightly, analyzing his answer. Smart choice. I'll put the order in. She turned and walked away, leaving Ji-hoon and Zarya alone. She's incredibly protective of you, Ji-hoon noted, picking up the water glass. I respect that. She knows you're someone worth guarding. Zarya felt a blush creep up her neck, a sensation she hadn't experienced in a very long time. We protect each other, Ji-hoon. It's just been the two of us for a while now. She's seen me go through some tough patches, and she decided she was going to be my shield just like I'm hers. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. You mentioned last night that you tried dating, but it didn't work out. I find that hard to believe. You're brilliant, beautiful, and you've built this amazing life. Any man would be lucky to be part of it. Zarya looked down at her hands. Her flaws, her insecurities, they were all tied to a deep-seated fear of not being enough, or worse, being wanted for the wrong reasons. It's not about luck, Ji-hoon. People like the idea of a strong, independent woman until they realize they can't control her. I was tired of shrinking myself to make someone else feel big, so I stopped trying. I focused on Rose, and I focused on this restaurant. I stopped looking for a missing piece because I realized I was already whole. Ji-hoon listened quietly, his eyes never leaving her face. He understood that feeling of isolation, though it came from a different source. I spent my entire 20s doing the exact opposite, he admitted. I tried to control everything. The company, the board members, the stock prices. I thought if I had enough power, no one could hurt me. But the truth was, I was just building a fortress around a very empty room. Zarya looked up, seeing the genuine pain behind his glasses. That's a heavy way to live. It is, he agreed, his voice dropping to a softer register. But yesterday, standing on that street corner watching you and journey with that little boy, it felt like someone knocked a hole in my fortress. The air finally came in. Before Zarya could respond, Journey returned carrying a large tray. She set down 2 plates of rosemary garlic chicken with roasted root vegetables and a side of freshly baked artisan bread. The aroma filled the space between them, rich and earthy. Eat up, Journey said, setting a cloth napkin near his plate. If you don't like it, you're officially banned from the premises. I'll keep that in mind, Ji-hoon said, picking up his fork. As Journey walked away, Zarya let out a breath. Sorry, she's laying it on a bit thick today. He took a bite of the chicken, his eyes widening slightly. He chewed slowly, savoring the flavor. Zarya, this is extraordinary. She smiled, a wave of pride washing over her. Thank you. It's one of our best sellers. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the initial awkwardness melting away into the familiar rhythm they had shared 10 years ago in quiet library corners. They talked about the city, about the changing seasons, about the struggles of running a business. Zarya found herself opening up, telling him about the nights she'd cried over broken ovens and delayed shipments, things she rarely shared with anyone. Ji-hoon listened intently, offering understanding rather than trying to fix her problems with his wealth. He was present completely and entirely. As they finished their meal, Ji-hoon wiped his mouth with a napkin and looked toward the front window. How is the boy? Micah, I think his name was. Zarya followed his gaze. He's sitting near the bakery again today. Rose took him some soup earlier. She says a vendor gave him a massive bottle of juice and a fruit cup, which was highly unusual. Ji-hoon offered a small, sheepish smile. I might have had a word with the vendor yesterday, and left a tab. Zarya stared at him, her eyes widening in surprise. You did that? I did. He shifted slightly in his chair. After you left, I realized you were right. I have all this resource, all this capability, and I was just standing there watching him suffer. Your daughter did more in 3 seconds than I had done in a lifetime of walking past people in need. I wanted to start changing that. Zarya felt a sudden, profound shift in her chest. She had always known Ji-hoon had a good heart, buried under layers of corporate armor. But seeing him actively try to tear that armor down was deeply moving. That is a really beautiful thing to do, Ji-hoon. He looked at her, his expression serious and entirely vulnerable. I want to do better, Zarya. I want to be a man who deserves to sit at this table. The lunch rush had finally died down. The restaurant was quiet, the afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the wooden tables. Journey walked out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She walked over to their table, eyeing Ji-hoon's empty plate. Clean plate, she noted, sounding almost impressed. I suppose you can stay. Thank you, Journey, he said, standing up. I appreciate the hospitality. Zarya stood up as well, walking him toward the door. The air between them was different now, lighter, filled with a fragile but distinct hope. I have to go back to the office, Ji-hoon said, checking his watch. But I was wondering, do you and Journey have plans for Sunday? Zarya tilted her head, her brown hair falling over her shoulder. Sunday is our only day off. We usually go to the community center to volunteer, and then we go to the park for a picnic. It's not very glamorous. It sounds perfect, he said without a moment of hesitation. Would you mind if I joined you? I can bring the picnic blankets, and I promise I will not wear a suit. Zarya looked back at Journey, who was pretending to clean a table nearby, but was clearly listening to every word. The teenager looked up, caught her mother's eye, and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug of approval. We would like that, Zarya said, turning back to Ji-hoon. But you have to carry the heavy baskets. It's the rule for newcomers. I accept the terms, he smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that took 10 years off his face. He opened the glass door, the sounds of the city rushing in to fill the quiet space. He stepped out onto the pavement, but before he walked away, he turned back. Zarya, yes, 10 years ago, you told me I was pretending to be someone I was not. You told me to find out who I really wanted to be. He adjusted his glasses, looking at her with absolute certainty. It took me a decade to figure it out, but I know now. I want to be the man who shares a life with someone who makes the world warmer. I'm not rushing you. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I just want you to know why I'm here. Zarya felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. She simply nodded, her heart full, the wall she had built around herself slowly crumbling to dust. I know, Ji-hoon. I'll see you Sunday. He nodded, turning and walking down the busy street, blending into the crowd, yet entirely distinct in her eyes. Zarya stood at the door for a long time, watching the spot where he had disappeared. A small hand slipped into hers. She looked down to see Journey standing beside her, looking out the window. He's not terrible, Journey admitted quietly. For a guy who owns half the city, he actually ate his vegetables. Zarya laughed, a bright, clear sound that echoed in the quiet restaurant. He did, didn't he? Are you going to let him stick around? Journey asked, looking up at her mother with serious eyes. I mean, actually stick around. Because I don't want you getting hurt again, Mom. If he messes up, I'm going to have to ban him. And he seems like he pays well. Zarya squeezed her daughter's hand, pulling her into a half hug. I think we could take a chance, Rose. People change. Sometimes they just need a little reminder of who they're supposed to be. And I think he's finally ready to figure that out. Well, as long as he carries the heavy baskets on Sunday, I guess I can tolerate him, Journey said, pulling away and walking back toward the kitchen. But I'm making him carry the cooler too. Zarya smiled, leaning against the glass door. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, people rushing by with their heads down, lost in their own worlds. But across the street, little Micah was sitting on a bench, happily drinking a large bottle of fruit juice, kicking his small feet in the air. Sunday arrived with the sky, so clear it looked freshly washed. Ji-hoon showed up at the community center at 9 in the morning in old jeans and sneakers that still had the crease of never having been worn outdoors, carrying 2 picnic blankets under one arm and a cooler he'd clearly never operated in his life. Journey took one look at him, struggling with the cooler's wheels catching on the sidewalk, and let out a long-suffering sigh before wordlessly taking over. The community center smelled like industrial coffee and construction paper. Zarya ran the Sunday morning food pantry line there twice a month, something she'd done since before Journey came into her life, and something Journey had folded herself into with the same fierce loyalty she brought to everything. Ji-hoon spent the morning packing grocery bags with canned goods and boxed pasta, his $4,000 watch catching the fluorescent light every time he reached for another box. He didn't mention the watch once. He didn't mention anything about who he was. An elderly woman in line asked him if he was new to volunteering, and he said yes, ma'am, still learning, and meant it in more ways than she could have known. You're better at this than I expected, Journey told him around 11, handing him another stack of bags to fill. Low bar, he said, and she almost smiled, the closest thing to approval he'd gotten from her yet. By noon they were at the park, blankets spread beneath a wide oak tree, the cooler finally earning its keep. Ji-hoon had, without telling anyone, arranged for the Copper Spoon's Sunday-off staff to deliver a full spread that morning. Not because Zarya couldn't handle a picnic, but because he'd asked quietly the night before whether it would be all right if he contributed something, and she'd said only if you don't make a production of it. So there was no production, just fried chicken, potato salad, a jar of sweet tea, and a container of the peach cobbler she'd offered him that first night, which he'd apparently requested by name. You remembered the cobbler, Zarya said, staring at the container. I remember everything you've ever fed me, Ji-hoon said. It's a very short and very precious list. They ate under the tree, while Journey wandered the park with a small group of kids from the community center, including Zarya, and noticed with a soft ache in her chest, Micah, who'd been brought along by one of the center's outreach workers after Journey mentioned him by name. He was wearing new sneakers. Nobody said anything about where they'd come from. I have a confession, Ji-hoon said, watching the kids chase each other across the grass. Another one? You're racking up quite a list today. I looked into more than just the water vendor and Micah. I had someone from my foundation quietly find out what it would take to get him and his mother into stable housing. It's already in motion. I didn't want to tell you until it was real, because I didn't want you to think I was performing again. Zarya looked at him for a long moment. You're not performing, she said finally. That's the thing I keep noticing. You're just doing it. I had a good teacher, he said. 10 years late, but a good one. They sat there through the afternoon, the sun sliding slow across the sky, Journey occasionally reporting back with updates on the kids' games like a field correspondent, and by the time the shadows started stretching long across the grass, something between Zarya and Ji-hoon had settled into a shape neither of them rushed to name out loud. It didn't need naming yet. It just needed time, and for the first time in 10 years, both of them had plenty of it to give. That evening, Zarya turned off the open sign at the Copper Spoon, flipping it so the closed side faced the street. She walked into the kitchen, the smell of roasted garlic and fresh bread still lingering in the warm air. She tied her apron back around her waist, ready to prep for the coming week. For the first time in a decade, she wasn't just working to survive or to forget. She was working toward a future she actually wanted to see. Okay, Rose, Zarya called out, clapping her hands together. Let's get these vegetables chopped. We have a lot of work to do. And just like that, the two of them fell back into their rhythm. A family built on choice, resilience, and an unwavering capacity to care. The world outside was not perfect. It was messy, complicated, and often deeply unfair. But as Zarya looked around her restaurant at the life she had built and the daughter she loved, she knew that broken things could be fixed. Love was not always a fairy tale, and it rarely came wrapped in a perfect package. Sometimes it looked like a terrified teenager trying to protect her mother. Sometimes it looked like a billionaire learning how to see the invisible people on the street. And sometimes it looked like an old friend coming back, ready to start over. The past was finally behind them, and the days ahead looked remarkably bright. If this story stayed with you, do us a favor and tell us in the comments. Was it Journey handing Micah that bread, or was it Ji-hoon quietly fixing things without asking for credit? We want to know which moment got you. Share this with someone who needs the reminder today that kindness given freely always finds its way back around. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Blossom and Baobabs so you never miss the next one. The lesson this story carries is a simple one. You don't need a fortune to change someone's life. Sometimes all it takes is noticing the person everyone else has trained themselves to walk past. And sometimes the people who hurt us aren't villains, just frightened kids who grew up and finally learned how to be brave. Give people room to become better, not because they're owed it, but because you might be the reason they finally do.